I'm glad you made it back, Anna. Okay, and I'm gonna mute you just so the line is clean. Okay, so sitting, and I know we've straddled the bolster, which is also really helpful. So you can either sit cross-legged or you can sit, you don't even have to roll it. You can just sit straddling. Good. If you need to sit cross-legged or if you need to sit in a chair, that's also okay. And you can always put even just a small roll under the pelvis. Right up into the sitting bones. But one hand on heart, one hand on belly. And let's start with the breath through the mouth, very diffuse. And again, the breath is a very subtle, right? It's ideally in this practice is very subtle, very diffuse, but also can ask for a lot of softening around the breath, and that may take time. But with the mouth open, with the jaw a little more slack, the back of the throat open, notice how the breath moves in. And even though the hand is on near the breastbone, feeling the back, the sides, the whole circumference of the rib cage and chest, lungs and heart. And then lower hand, right, letting the breath move down. Letting that belly fill. And even playing with a sense of a gentle press of the breath out. Again, very easy and diffuse. And again, the front, the back, the sides, the circumference of that upper bowl, mid bowl of the pelvis. And a little bit of movement. So a little extension can be quite slight, and flexion. Extension. Rolling towards the pubis, the ribs moving forward, the face lifting. The back rounding, the ribs moving back. The head moving forward and down. And the sense of really listening and honoring this body. This right expression of you, expression of your essence, of your soul, of your being. And notice where your awareness is drawn. Maybe it's the brain and spinal cord, maybe it's ribs or base of pelvis, or the breath. And make it what you need to make it in this moment. slowly coming to center point. Good, and just touching on, we spoke about this before, but just this sense of the body of a woman, the female body, and maybe even tracing your awareness back through your lineage, through your mother's line, your father's line, the women, just a slight awareness of. And maybe even further back towards the first woman. And it doesn't matter where your attention moves. Maybe it's the challenges of the women, or the suppression, or the adoration of, the honoring the wisdom of the ceremony around. Just noticing what feels important to acknowledge in your body and in your place in this lineage that will move forward, whether it's from your body or not, from your creation, from your input, from your energy. Simple breath, inhale through the nose, nice and diffuse. Exhaling through the mouth. Inhale through the mouth. And exhale through the nose. Gentle breath, easy breath. Inhale nose. Exhale mouth. Body soft and diffuse with the breath. Inhale mouth. Exhale nose. If you can remember that pattern, inhale nose, exhale mouth, inhale mouth, exhale nose. One more on your own. Connect you to all of life. Right, your body, the earth, your body and breath, the atmosphere, the stars, your body fluids, your fluids, the fluids of the body or the earth. Right, all interconnected. And even beyond our earth, into the galaxy. Into the universe. Slowly shift forward and into one of these blankets and use it for my head. So I'm going to come away on my back. Good, and letting the breath be your guide So I always notice when I'm pushing, I hold my breath. When I'm thinking, I hold my breath. When I'm touching into something that I'm confused about or don't understand, I hold my breath. I hold my breath a lot. So the awareness of that can be really helpful. Just taking a moment, feel the weight of the feet and the lower legs, the weight of the back, the weight of the arms. Even just feeling how lifting the head a little. And your arms can be, let's start with them alongside the body. So I'm going to let my head roll a little to one side. And slowly back to center. Really interested in the weight of the head. The head is moving. The ribs aren't moving. That relationship through the neck, through the front of the neck or the side or the back of the neck. Feeling the engagement of the tissues, feeling little, I feel little pulls every once in a while, a little just sound. And if anything feels weird, just slow it down. Slow the breath down, slow the movement down. Back through center. And second side, notice when the breath gets shallow. Notice when it gets deep. Right, when the breath gets deep, it might just be that the body's comfortable or the body has found a place of ease or integration. And when the breath gets shallow, maybe there's a resistance, maybe just an acknowledgement of that. And then I'm just going to roll onto my side. So I'm using this blanket under my head. My legs are stacked. My arms are somewhat stacked. Good, palms together. So keeping my palms together, I'm just going to play with letting my top shoulder blade, the shoulder blade's not on the floor, move up towards the ear and down towards the hip and up towards the ear. And again, these can be quite subtle, or you can play with subtle and less subtle, really listening to the breath. Good. And then pause here. So the under shoulder, right? I'm going to let that press into the floor just a little bit, right? Just so there's a little bit of fortitude in the shoulder and upper arm and a little bit in the back. So if I let go of that, I feel the ribs sink towards the floor and there's a little curve towards the floor. And as I press that outer arm into the floor again, it's not a lot. It's really just a reinforcement, not from a place of force. Maybe there's more length in the neck. There's more sense of from tailbone to base of skull, that line. Good, and from there, I'm going to let my top arm slide forward. I'm still keeping that little bit of engagement as I take the other arm forward. And then palms together and take the arm back. So there's just this little bit of structure in the under shoulder. And again, sliding the palm forward, palm stacking, and then top arm slides past and together and slides back And palms together, and then I'm going to relax the under shoulder, and I'm going to let the top shoulder slide forward and back. And maybe there's just a little more play as I slide forward and back. Again, find a pacing that works for you, that allows the neck and the head to move, the ribs and shoulders and waist to move in a way that feels good. And then coming back to center. And then I'm just going to tip my arms down to my knees and let my head tip towards my knees. So there's a little bit of a curve in the spine. Again, you get to decide how much that is. It can be quite subtle. And again, I'm just going to put a little, actually that under shoulder, the shoulder that's on the floor, just a little bit of movement, maybe a little lift towards the ear and away from the ear. And it's not going to be very much. It's going to be more of an edge than a movement. Good. And then take that top arm and again, shoulder towards the ear and away from the ear. Just a little movement. And maybe even taking the shoulder back and forward. Not a lot of movement in the arm, but just engagement of back of shoulder. Again, just a little almost toggle. And then bottom shoulder, just a little press into the floor. And again, more to, instead of leaning into the floor fully, there's just a little bit of support from the underside. Maybe there's more awareness from tailbone to base of skull, that line of the spine, the side of the neck. And then let's move that top arm forward, maybe palm towards fingertips. It can be much even less than that. And then sliding palms together and sliding that hand up towards the wrist. So your range can be quite small. Really depends on the under shoulder, on the ribs, on the neck, on the waist, on the breath. One more time, forward and back, finding a pacing that feels good. And then coming back to neutral, relax the under shoulder and let that top arm slide forward and back. Just to feel the difference. And then come through center. Okay, and then I'm just going to switch. So arms, instead of straight out in front, just slightly above. And again, could be quite subtle. So there's a little more, I guess, extension in the spine. It's quite subtle. Even just having the arms up a little bit changes the under shoulder, like the armpit, those side ribs. So again, I'm just going to move that under shoulder, the shoulder that's against the floor, just a little bit. Again, it's not very much movement at all. I just want to feel where it is. Does it feel comfortable? Top shoulder up towards the ear, down towards the hip, up and maybe down. And then just that little bit of reinforcement from underneath. It can be quite small, like pressing palms together, just a little. And then letting that top arm slide forward, and this one might be even smaller. All depends on your body. Letting your breath be your guide. Right? Sometimes I almost imagine the breath creating the movement. Or creating the container for the movement. Forward and back, forward and back. And then palms together, relaxing the effort of that under shoulder And then seeing how that changes the movement of the top arm and even the release or the confidence of that under shoulder, the shoulder that's on the floor, or the armpit side ribs. Good. And then let's take that to top leg and just bring it slightly behind, and let's roll onto the back. Good, and extend the legs. And I'm going to roll to the other side. Now I'm going to flip around so I can see you. Again, less is always more. So arms stacked, maybe just a little nuggle in that shoulder that's against the floor, and then the shoulder that's the top shoulder facing the ceiling, and just up towards the ear, down towards the hip. Maybe even slide that shoulder forward and back just a little bit. Okay, so then bottom shoulder is just pressing into the floor. Again, just enough to help you find a sense of length through your neck, through your mid-back, maybe even through your lower back. It's not very much. Sliding that top arm forward. Again, maybe palms to fingertips, palms together, top arm fingertips to the bottom palm, or even less. Just one more. And it could be even smaller. And then relax the effort of the shoulder that's on the floor. And let that top arm slide forward and back. And really listening less to my words and to more of what's happening in your body, in your breath, in your awareness. And then coming back to center. Let's angle the arms down towards the knees, the head down towards the knees. Again, just a little wiggle in the bottom shoulder and the top shoulder, shoulder blade towards the ear and towards the hip. Good, and maybe just a little bit of forward and back, initiating from the shoulder blade, right? So shoulder blade squeeze towards the spine, and then shoulder blade reaches towards the fingers. And pause again, just a little bit of fortification, reinforcement, gentle reinforcement, integrity. And letting that top arm slide forward a little bit. And these angles might be much smaller. Notice if your breath gets shallow, or if you hold the breath, smaller, slower, and then relax that effort and let the top arm slide along. Top hand slide along the bottom hand. Head relaxed, neck relaxed. Breath relaxed. And center. And then let's take those arms, both arms slightly above the shoulder. And again, it can be quite minimal. There's just a little more lift in the head, a little more opening in the belly, a little more reach in the arms, a little more ask in the armpits.
Good. Bottom shoulder, just a little wiggle just to see that it's okay in the right spot or in a spot that's okay. Top shoulder, just a little lift and lower. And maybe a little squeeze towards the shoulder blade or shoulder blade towards the spine, so that arm might move back towards the body. And then a little forward. Good. And then again, little press of that bottom shoulder, shoulder against the floor, just enough to feel some support in the neck and the upper back. Maybe a sense of width between the shoulder blades, or even some sense of width in the chest. And then movement. Again, movement can be quite small. Top arm forward and back. Listening, feeling, breathing. And relaxing that under shoulder, that arm against the floor, and letting the top arm slide. Maybe there's a little more freedom. Maybe it can integrate that integrity that was offered. And looking for ease and pause. And then let's take that top leg and slowly bring it behind and slowly roll onto your back. Go ahead and straighten the legs, and notice when you straighten the legs, what happens in the, right, so my head was on the blanket, there's a little more curve, but as I straighten the legs, my body shifted towards my feet, so there's just a little tip of the chin towards the chest. Notice what happened in your neck, and how does that feel? Notice the sensation in the arms and the neck, shoulders, upper back. And I'm going to bend knee, and I'm going to roll to that first side again. And this time I'm going to let my arms bend. So the bottom arm is like the elbows in front of me, and the hand can be up. Doesn't have to be perfect. Palms stacked, or you can even, actually this might be easier. Depends on you. Depends on the shoulder, the top shoulder and the bottom shoulder. But your hand can be either on your forearm or on the other hand, the top hand on the bottom hand. And I'm just going to play with the bottom of the body, the knees. So top knee, I'm just going to play with pulling the hip back, so the top knee will move away from the bottom knee behind, and then letting that hip move forward. So I'm initiating from the hip and then moving back and moving forward. And it can be like a train, like a little move and a little move and a little move, and then back, a little move and a little move and a little move. And then coming to center. Then I'm going to try to hike the hip towards the shoulder, little hip hike, and then down away from the shoulder. And you might even notice what happens on the hip that's underneath. So as I hike the hip up to the shoulder, what happens to the hip against the floor? And then as I move the hip down away from the shoulder, what happens to the hip on the floor? Good. One more. Up. and down. And these are simple movements, but we're just going to play. So I'm going to take the toes now off the top leg, and I'm going to reach them forward a little. So again, the hip's going to move forward, the leg's going to move forward, and then bring it back. And then I'm going to take that same foot and move it slightly down. The hip is going to move and bring it back. So the leg can reach, it can stay bent. And then I'm going to bring the leg down almost below the body and bring it back. Let's do that again, slightly forward, hips moves forward. My body might move towards that front arm, towards the floor and back. And then down at a diagonal. And the knees together. And then letting the leg move straight down. And notice the top hip might move, feel like it's moving behind the bottom hip. And then legs together, knees together. One more time, forward. And knees together. And again, this can be quite a small movement if you need to, right? We're asking movement in the lower body, in the pelvis, little diagonal reach of the toes forward and down, and then knees together, feet together, and then toes down in line with the pelvis. Maybe even letting that top hip roll back just a little bit. And then bring the knees together. And then let's play with taking that, the knee down and the arm up. Just a little. So fingers are above the forehead or head and the toes below the hip, and then bring them back to where they were. Let's do one more like that. Maybe even fingers over the crown of the head. So you start to feel the shoulder moving back a little and the hip moving back a little. And then you get to decide, right? So I am going to take this and let myself roll onto my back. And if that feels a little precarious, you can do the upper body first and then the lower body, or the lower body first, then the upper body. Good. Extend the legs for a moment. Notice your breath, your jaw, your throat, the back of the neck, the belly, lower back. And let's roll to the other side. And again, that bottom arm bent, you can have either hands together or top hand on the bottom forearm. Top leg, the knee is going to pull back, or rather initiate from the hip's going to pull back. So the knee moves behind, and then the hip moves forward. Feeling what's happening in the hip, in the sacrum, the lower spine. And then through center, maybe even noticing if there's movement in the lower spine. This again can be quite small. So hip hike up towards the shoulder. Noticing the hip that's on the floor and hip moving away from the shoulder. And the initiation can be quite small, right? Because the initiation is the most important part. Like that we often think end range is important. But the initiation, how the muscle is engaging, how the tissues are engaging, how the breath is moving as we engage is really important. And hip hike. And lower, I'd say the breath is more important than the movement. And hip down. And center. So even if you just imagine the movement and you breathe, that's more important than doing the movement. Let's take the top leg and reach it forward. and then bring it back. And then reaching slightly down at a diagonal. Again, the toes can go as far as they feel comfortable going. You can stay close to the other toes, maybe toe down below the tailbone. So you feel that top hip moving back a little bit. Again, feel into what feels available, feels good. Going forward, legs together, a little diagonal, knees together, a little exploration of down below the pelvis, feeling that weight shift. And again, it all depends on the weight of the pelvis and the stability of the weight of the leg. Good, one more, forward and back. Again, breath supports the movement, creates the movement. And then below. Good. And let's take that top arm, top leg, and just reach them away from each other. And they can actually go forward a little bit. So you feel that movement forward towards the floor where the eyes can see, which might feel more safe. And then maybe towards the forehead and in front of the pelvis. And then just above the head, again, you get to decide just below the pelvis, and already that brings that top shoulder maybe back a little bit, top hip back a little bit. And then maybe it's moving the hip first and then the arm, or moving both at the same time as you roll back onto your back. Let your knees stay bent for a moment, the back, the lower spine, lower back, back of waist, get heavy and wide. Back of the neck, heavy and wide. Extend the legs. Good. And you can either stay with this blanket under your head, or you can take the blanket out. Whatever feels good. Arms close to the body, just taking a couple breaths. Feeling your head and your spine close to the ground. Or imagining close to the ground. Right, imagining those root systems that look very similar to the branches of the nerves. Right, with their own communication system similar to ours. And that entrainment that we are of the earth in many ways. Minerals, intelligence, consciousness. Letting your mind drop into your heart, and your heart drop into your pelvis. And feel that even though we're laying down, that sense of the pelvis dropping into the earth. Toes. Hands and feet really slow, very curious. The internal movement, maybe even the temperature of the air against the skin.
the feel of the skin, the movement of the skin, any places that feel more taut or more loose, the movement of the arms, the legs, rolling or folding. And maybe rolling the body. Up to 6. And you can always stay down, one hand on heart, one hand on belly. Let's finish with the sound of VU, V-U. After your next exhale, inhale.